Συνεχίζουμε με τους ομιλητές που θα σας μιλήσουν για θέματα που εντάσσονται στο πρόγραμμα στην πρώτη συνεδρία. Και καλώ την κυρία Leonora Navari να μας μιλήσει για το εξής θέμα: η συλλογή περιηγητικών κειμένων του Ιδρύματος Sylvia's Ioannou. Παρακαλώ.
Good evening, everyone. Today, we see the results of 2 years of intensive gathering and categorization of data on the island of Cyprus, which formed the Zephyros Research Program. The Zephyros Program draws its information from the books about Cyprus in the Sylvia Ioannou collection, which is now part of the Sylvia Ioannou Foundation. I was indirectly involved in this program, not as a researcher, but as the bibliographer of the Ioannou collection. The Ioannou collection is dedicated to the island of Cyprus. Cyprus in all its aspects: geography, cartography, history, physical beauty, literary associations, archaeological richness, its relations with its neighbors, and the political developments which informed it. Many of the books in the collection deal directly with these subjects: Gaudry on geology, Baudouin on the Cypriot dialect, Geoffrey on the historic monuments of Cyprus. But the material in the database comes from the storehouse of the travel literature, which forms a large part of the collection. There are 125 travel books in the database, less than half of the total in the collection. They cover the period up to 1800. All are described in the catalog of the Ioannou collection, Cyprus in the Levant, published in 2016. I'm happy to say that the collection continues to be enriched. These books are written in various languages: English, Italian, Latin, German, French, Old Czech, Swedish, Spanish, and so on. Travel writers spread their nets widely, and an amazing variety of subjects comes to their attention. It is the job of a historical bibliographer not only to describe accurately a particular copy of the book in question, in this instance a work of travel, with all its attendant bibliographical detail, but also to relate the work to its period of publication, to the circumstances which prompted its publication, and to give some indication of the material contained therein. This takes a lot of research. But in the end, we construct a mental picture or a map of comings and goings, a picture of travel in the Levant. Since the Ioannou collection is dedicated to Cyprus, our mental picture shows us a map of Cyprus, with travelers arriving, departing, meeting local figures, doing business, carrying out research, visiting historical and religious sites, meeting each other, perhaps traveling together, and then parting. The geographical location of Cyprus, opposite both the coast of Asia Minor and that of the Holy Land, is one of the reasons for this plethora of travel books on the island. The Ioannou collection is particularly rich in early travels to the Holy Land that also contain rare descriptions of Cyprus in the medieval and early modern periods. These travel books are written mostly by pilgrims. Pilgrimage to the holy places began at a surprisingly early period, particularly when we consider the difficulties of travel before the modern period. Whether these travelers came via Venice, Marseille, or other seaports, the ships carrying them almost always anchored in Cyprus, both going to and returning from the shores of the eastern Mediterranean. Travelers from the hinterland of Central Asia would also visit Cyprus, since most of them would reach the coast of Asia Minor and return to Europe by ship. Sometimes the traveler spent only a few days on the island. In other instances, he might spend as much as several months or years. Pilgrims such as Benjamin of Tudela, Ludolf von Suchem, Bernard von Breidenbach, and Felix Fabry described their experiences in Cyprus between the 12th and the 15th centuries. It is important to keep in mind that the date of the journey and that of the printed account sometimes differ by many centuries. The earliest printed account of the Holy Land in Cyprus is that by Ludolf von Suchum, published in about 1476. It predates the publication of Benjamin of Tudela's account by 100 years, although the date of Benjamin's journey is earlier. The circumstances of these journeys are important, particularly the reason for the journey. The 13th century writer Jehan, Sieur de Joinville, joined Louis IX in Limassol in 1248 and went with him on crusade to Egypt. Cyprus was the jumping-off point for the crusade, and Joinville went back and forth between Egypt and Cyprus many times. His account was known in manuscript for 3 centuries, but it was not printed until the 16th century. Pilgrimage remained one of the major reasons for travel to the Levant, and most of our authors of the medieval period and up to the 15th century were indeed pilgrims, but other factors were also at work, although sometimes these are unclear. The earliest of our travelers, Benjamin of Tudela, left Spain in about 1160 and returned in about 1172. He traveled via Marseille to Italy, Greece, Turkey, reaching Persia, before returning via Arabia, Egypt, and North Africa. The specific purpose of Benjamin's journey has still not been determined by scholars. Pilgrimage may have been one reason, but Benjamin also discusses commerce extensively, and many scholars have determined that he was a merchant. He records all the Jewish communities he came across during the course of his travels, and also describes everyday life in the countries he visited. But what prompted him to undertake this 12-year journey is still unknown. Most of our 16th century authors again traveled as pilgrims. The accounts of Ludwig Tschudi and Hans Stockar, who made the pilgrimage together in 1519, are of importance for the early part of the century. However, their accounts were not published at the time. Tschudis description was published a century after his travels, while that of Stockar did not appear until the mid-19th century. The works of Wolfgang Münzer, Melchior von Seydlitz, Johann Helfrich, and Christoph Führer von Heimendorf provide valuable information on the island during the latter half of the 16th century. The accounts of Nicholas Radziwill, Christoph Harrant, Aquilante Roqueta, and Jan Kutwik are especially valuable because these men were among the few travelers who visited Cyprus shortly after the Turkish conquest. Pilgrimage was the ostensible reason for these journeys, and it is clear that Radziwill was clearly inspired by religious feeling. But it seems that Führer von Heimendorf undertook his journey for the sake of travel itself as a form of education, and his companion, Helfrich, also undertook the pilgrimage for reasons other than strictly religious, as is clear from his text, which describes in detail the customs of the local peoples he visited. In some cases, pilgrims traveled together or met in the Levant and then traveled together for a time. For example, at the beginning of the century, Tschudi and Stockar traveled together, while in the mid-century, Johann Helfrich and Führer von Heimendorf left Germany together. Wolfgang Münzer and Melchior von Seydlitz also traveled together for some part of their journey. Each of these men wrote an account of his experiences. In such instances, it is of particular interest and importance to compare their accounts. For example, after landing in Jaffa and visiting Ramah, Münzer and von Seydlitz were imprisoned by the Turks as spies and were eventually sent to Constantinople, where they were incarcerated in the Galata Tower. After 2 years' imprisonment, they were ransomed through the efforts of the French ambassador to the Porte, Jean de Lavigne. Their individual experiences are an important source of information, and their accounts also give us some idea of their attitudes to foreign climes and peoples. This is an important question which Professor Bouchard has touched in his talk just now. With the approach of the 17th century, the reasons for travel multiplied considerably. The pilgrimage was still significant, but science, commerce, adventuring, diplomacy, and politics assumed increasingly important roles. In 1604, the diplomatist and military man Beauvau traveled to Constantinople in the retinue of Jean Gontard Biron, Baron de Salignac, the French ambassador to the Porte. Beauveau has left us an account of all the harbors in the Adriatic and in the Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean where the ambassadorial party anchored, including Cyprus. The published account of the diplomat Johannes von Egmond, who made a journey to the Levant in 1620, presents us with a serious problem. His journal was edited by his nephew into a series of letters, but the nephew included in these letters information from another Dutchman, John Heyman, who was vicar of the Dutch community in Smyrna from 1700 to 1706. Thus, not only do we have information on the island from two different periods, but we don't know who is providing it or, in fact, what period it describes. So scholars watch out at this point. The eccentric Scotsman, William Lithgow, seems to have traveled for the sake of travel. At the beginning of the 17th century, Lithgow set out on the first of his extraordinary journeys. He traveled on foot and thus had a far more intimate knowledge of the areas he traveled through than most of the writers in our collection. He also suffered robbery, torture by the Inquisition, and other cruelties. In the 1670s, the Dutch artist Cornelius Debryn set out on his travels. He is an example of a traveler artist who specifically set out to paint, but who also wrote a detailed account of his journey. This was a rare phenomenon. Many of our earlier travelers were accompanied by artists who produced important documentary evidence, but they did not leave written accounts of their journeys. The many paintings of the artist J.B. Van Moor testify to his long residence in Constantinople in the late 17th and early 18th centuries, but we have no written account of his experience in the East. From Debryn, we have both. By the 18th century, commerce had become one of the major reasons for undertaking travel to the Levant. Paul Lucas is one of the most interesting travelers of this period. He was a true adventurer who sought wealth in the East in the late 17th and early 18th centuries. He fought with the Venetians at the siege of Negroponte, Halkida in Evia, in 1688, and then went to seek his fortune. So successful was this journey with the antiquities and jewels that he brought back and sold to the Cabinet du Roi that Louis XIV sent him on a mission to Greece and Asia Minor to purchase antiquities for the royal collections. During this second journey, Lucas spent 20 days in Smyrna copying the Monumentum Ancyranum, a Greek translation of the Emperor Augustus's list of achievements, which he had desired to be inscribed on tablets and placed in his mausoleum. The tablets in Rome disappeared, but the Greek copy was found in Ankara by the diplomat traveler Busbek in the 16th century. Lucas's is one of the clearest copies of this important document. In all, Lucas made 4 journeys to the Levant. Commerce also played a role in bringing one of the most important writers on Cyprus to the island. Giovanni Medici set out for the Levant as an employee of an English merchant established in Livorno. He spent 8 years in Cyprus, eventually becoming chancellor for the consulates of both England and Tuscany. His friend and associate Antonio Mondaini, who lived in Cyprus for 16 years and knew Medici well, has left us a manuscript of letters describing life there. The 18th century also saw the advent of the traveler scientist. Scientists set out on organized missions to explore various aspects of the physical nature of the Levant, and they often hired artists to accompany them. The first important botanist to visit the island was Piton de Tournefort, who set out in 1700 with his artist Claude Aubrier at the command of Louis XIV. He was followed in 1751 by Frederick Hasselquist, a student of Linnaeus. The great botanist John Sibthorpe spent over a month exploring the flora of the island in 1787 with his artist Ferdinand Bauer. All 3 have left accounts of their stay in Cyprus. Although Richard Pocock was a cleric and eventually became an Anglican bishop, he spent most of his time away from his church, interested in natural science in all its aspects. Pocock may almost be considered a professional traveler. Certainly, his travel writings are of great importance, and he has left us a detailed account of his month in Cyprus in 1738. The naturalist Sonini was sent to the Levant by Louis XVI, and he has left us a long description of his sojourn on the island. Art and archaeology had always played a part in luring travelers to the Levant, but serious attempts at collecting antiquities by travelers themselves developed in the 18th century. A number of these travelers were connected with ambassadorial missions. The numismatist Sestini traveled and carried out research while he was in the service of Count Ludolf, ambassador of the Two Sicilies in Constantinople. The French ambassador to the Porte, Choiseul-Gouffier, employed the artist Louis-François Cassas to record monuments, buildings, views, and so forth. Cassas spent a month in Cyprus in 1785 and has left us drawings of Larnaca, Famagusta, and Kyrenia. The Zephyrus program does not include material from books written during the 19th century, but it might be useful to take a brief look at the century. Travel in Cyprus at this time takes many turns. At the beginning of the century, we meet serious travelers such as the French naturalist Guillaume Olivier, who began publishing his extensive account of scientific researches in the Levant in 1801, and the diplomat and civil servant John MacDonald Kinnear, who visited Cyprus on his way to India in 1813. By the middle of the century, scientific curiosity and research become a major factor in travel to Cyprus, and we see the appearance of important works by Agnes Smith, Albert Gaudry, Theodore Kochi, Eugen Oberhumer, and others. In 1869, Thomas Cook organized his first tour of the Levant, and from that period, travel turns into tourism for a majority of travelers. And the phenomenon of the professional travel writer appears. In 1878, Cyprus comes under British rule, and many books on the island begin to appear in English. Exploitation of the archaeological wealth of the island becomes rampant. It is this sort of book and this sort of experience that the Zephyros database draws on. The database allows us to collate this information and to draw larger pictures, not only of travelers and their purposes, but of the condition and state of Cyprus from the 12th to the 18th centuries. Thank you.
Ευχαριστώ θερμά την κυρία Ναβάρη για την σφαιρική εικόνα που δώσατε της συλλογής των κειμένων που στεγάζονται στο Ίδρυμα Σίλβιας Ιωάννου.